And I'm just going to ask you when to change the slide since you're screen sharing. So you can go ahead and put up our agenda. Okay, so just real quickly, thank you for having us again. My name is Laura Janello, and Elle introduced. Did you introduce yourself? I don't know, but
I haven't yet. I'll introduce myself later.
Sure. So we are both farm to school specialists with Baltimore City Public Schools. And today what we're going to be doing is a broad overview of school gardening at Baltimore City Schools, the resources that our team provides as the farm to school team, and also just some general things to know about getting involved with schools and school gardens. We know that many master gardeners receive requests from schools who are interested in starting gardens or looking for support with gardens. So we thought this general overview could be helpful. So we'll start off with some introductions to our team, the school garden resources that we provide. I'll give an overview of gardening at city schools. And then Elle is going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the unique challenges that school gardens face. And we'll talk about how master gardeners can support the work that we do, supporting school gardens, and then how we can support your work as master gardeners. We have a really small group tonight, so feel free to ask questions as we go. Elle can help moderate initially while I'm presenting. And if you know where that raise your hand feature is on Zoom, you're welcome to use it. Feel free to type questions in the chat as well, and we will try to answer questions as we go. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so our organizational structure can be a little bit confusing. So I made a flow chart to hopefully communicate this a little bit more clearly. But Elle and I both work for Baltimore City Public Schools, and we sit in the Office of Food and Nutrition Services. So that is the department within city schools that handles school meals and everything to do with school meals. And we are part of a team of 4 people that are full-time farm to school. We work full-time on the farm to school program, the 4 of us. And that team, we all sit within the Department of Food and Nutrition Services, but we work out at a place called Great Kids Farm. And Baltimore City Public Schools is really unique in that the district owns an educational farm that's actually located in Catonsville, so just outside of the city. And just real quickly, is everybody familiar with Great Kids Farm? Because I don't have to go into too much detail if you are, but if you haven't heard of it, I can give kind of a quick overview.
Feel free to unmute and let us know, drop something in the chat.
All right, Michelle, I see that you are. That's terrific.
Yes, this is Sandy. I am.
Great. 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 Well, yeah, Great Kids Farm is fairly unique as assets go for school districts. Not every school district has a farm. And we also partner with an organization called Friends of Great Kids Farm, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And their mission really centers around supporting the programming and work happening at Great Kids Farm. So even though Great Kids Farm is owned and operated by Baltimore City Public Schools, our programs get a lot of funding support through Friends of Great Kids Farm, which does a lot of fundraising to support things like paying for buses for students to come on field trips to the farm, paying stipends for student interns who work at the farm over the summer and things like that. You can go to the next slide. So just real quickly, a little bit about the farm. We have 33 acres. We're an educational farm. So even though we do grow produce and raise animals, our primary mission is really about educating students. We are the hub of farm to school programming at Baltimore City Public Schools. So we do a lot of on-farm educational programs with students. And we also just have this great resource that we can use in our work supporting things that are happening at schools as well. We can go to the next slide. So just a quick overview of our programs. We have what we call direct educational programs. So these are programs in which we as educators are working directly with students. We do that through field trips that happen at the farm. We recently started in the last couple of years doing farm to classroom programs as well. So instead of just bringing students to the farm, we will also go out into classrooms and run planting programs or cooking programs. We have some on food waste and composting as well, and those are really fun. We do summits, which are basically fancy field trips with a theme. We have virtual field trips to the farm called FaceTime the Farmer. We do family open hours for Baltimore City school families. We run a summer camp now for students in grades 3 through 5, and we also have a high school internship program. So in addition to all of those direct educational programs, our work also involves a lot of capacity building and support for things that are happening at individual schools. So we think of these as slightly more indirect programs because they're still benefiting students, but we are not necessarily working directly with the students. So those programs include things like activity kits, which are classroom materials that teachers can use in their classroom to do agricultural themed activities. We offer seedlings and live educational materials for school gardens. So a lot of plants and seeds, basically. We do a lot of consulting on school gardening and outdoor learning, and we also do professional development for teachers and school staff. So the goal behind all of these programs is that through all of this work, we are able to give students multiple touch points with farm to school programming throughout their time at city schools. So even though they might only come for a field trip once, they hopefully have other ways to engage with our programs throughout their time at the end school. All right, so let's transition to an overview of school gardens at the district, and we can go to the next slide. So real quickly, I just wanted to throw up a slide. I'm sure we're all familiar with the benefits of school gardening, but part of the reason that we support this with this work is that it provides hands-on experiential learning for students, and that can really lead to increased student engagement and motivation to learn, can reinforce academic topics. There have been a lot of studies that have linked school gardens with improved academic outcomes, particularly in the STEM fields. There's opportunities for social emotional learning. More research has documented how time in school gardens or outdoor education can improve life skills, self-esteem, teamwork. And it provides an opportunity for students with different learning styles. So many teachers will tell us anecdotally that students that have trouble in the classroom will actually really excel in the garden or in an outdoor environment. We can go to the next slide. So just if you're not familiar with some of this research, I put up here 2 really great resources for more information on the benefits of school gardens. The National Farm to School Network has a summary fact sheet of some of this information, and the Children in Nature Network has a wonderful research library that is a searchable database and will give you kind of in-depth descriptions of the research articles, which is a really nice way to make science easily digestible. We can go to the next slide. So at city schools, Baltimore City Public Schools has roughly 170 some schools in the district. I don't actually have the exact number off the top of my head because it does change from year to year, but about 53 of those schools have active gardens currently. And we know of about 25 more schools that have expressed interest in starting a garden within the last couple of years. Most of these gardens tend to be located at elementary schools, but there are a handful of successful gardens at high schools. And this map shows which schools have gardens and which do not. So those in blue are schools with gardens. We can go to the next slide. So a school garden can look like many different things at schools. There's really a huge diversity and range to what it means to have a school garden. So they can be both indoors or outdoors. Indoors, there are schools doing things with hydroponics, with aquaponics, windowsill gardens under grow lights. And these indoor gardens can be a really great option for schools that might have limited outdoor space. And they can also be a really nice option for schools that are interested in starting a garden, but getting the funds and just kind of the people power behind starting an outdoor garden can take some time. So an indoor garden can be a nice way to build enthusiasm among students and the school community in the meantime. And outdoors, a lot of school gardens are in raised beds, which can help avoid some soil contamination issues, or pots and containers. There's a few schools that have some in the ground gardens, but those tend to be mostly pollinator gardens as opposed to vegetable gardens. And the gardens at schools will grow food, flowers, pollinator plants. There's schools that have fruit trees. So really there's a wide range of different things being grown. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the process of starting a school garden works for schools. And this is something that looks very different from school to school. So there is no top-down effort to promote school gardens at the district. It's not the type of thing where, every school gets a garden and it's going to have these 5 components or anything like that. So these are really ground up efforts that tend to be led by a passionate school staff member who has an interest in gardening and wants to start a school garden. And usually that person will start asking around looking for support. And this is where they might come to Master Gardeners. And hopefully they also come to us. And if they come to us, we can help them. But unfortunately, not everybody knows about our team or the work that we do. So we can't help support gardens we don't know about. So we never know what's going to happen there. But once they have a little bit of support at the school, they can mobilize a team of people who might want to help. They're going to fundraise for their garden. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. They will need to get approval from the district's central office to build any sort of permanent infrastructure. And they build their garden. And then the gardens are hopefully maintained by students, staff, and volunteers. And this is a process that does not always happen linearly. And I know, Michelle, you said you are at Frederick Elementary, and that their process of starting a garden has been long, and there's been ups and downs with COVID, and there's lots of different ways. And that process taking longer than people expect or people hope at the beginning is quite typical. So it does oftentimes take a little while to get these projects off the ground. We can go to the next slide. So basically, every school is different in terms of how a garden is managed. A really typical structure is that you'll have a small team of staff, and a student garden club will be led by one of those staff members that will participate in weekly maintenance, and maybe a staff member or a community member will adopt the garden over the summer months. And I just want to put a note here that teachers can earn what's called an achievement unit for any work that they do involving gardening or greening, through a program called the Green Leader AU program. And this is a nice incentive for teachers. Those achievement units are linked with the salary scale. So that's a nice incentive for them to do some of this work. But in addition to that kind of more typical structure, we also have some schools that actually have some really unique situations where they might actually have a dedicated garden educator on staff, or a sustainability educator that does a lot of gardening work. You also have situations where you have parents or community members who lead the gardening effort on the school campus, or in a few cases, you have a garden that's installed or managed by a partner organization. But those examples are more unusual, and the above situation where you have a group of staff managing the garden together with students is more common. We'll go to the next slide. And Elle, feel free to let me know if I need to speed up at all, because I'm not keeping a close eye on the clock.
I think you're on track.
Okay, great. So how do students get involved with the garden? There's lots of different models for student engagement. So green teams and garden clubs are really common models. So these would be after school or extracurricular clubs that would meet usually weekly. And those students might participate in the garden design, in maintenance, in the management, in research projects related to the garden. And the leadership responsibilities that those students take on really varies. So some schools, particularly schools that work with older students, will really give those students a lot of control in designing and developing the garden plan, and taking a real leadership role. And in other situations, the teacher or the staff member is giving those students more guidance. Another model that we've seen at schools is the garden might be incorporated into a particular class. So instead of revolving around a particular club, it revolves around a very specific class. I know there's a couple schools that have sustainability focused classes, and there's schools that might have a special education class, for example, that really sees the garden as a particular asset for those students. And that class will really be the primary population at the school that works with the garden. We also have schools where different classes will adopt different garden beds and manage those beds individually. So lots of different models. Go to the next
Laura,
slide.
one question came in and says, is there
Yeah.
one model that's more successful than another?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of student engagement, I don't necessarily see one model as being more successful than another, but I do think the green team and garden club model is more common. So I think that, and sometimes there's overlap between these models. So you might have a school that has a garden club that also has, different classes adopt different portions of the garden and things like that. So these are not mutually exclusive categories.
I will add that if a school wants to start a garden, that the garden club is the easiest way to get students involved from the beginning, whereas developing a class around the garden is a lot more work for that teacher who's developing their class, or having different classes adopt different beds means a top-down effort at the school. So for a school that just wants to get started, having a garden club or green team is their kind of like easy in if they're able to start an after-school club.
Yeah, and some of these other models tend to exist at schools that have had gardens established for a longer period of time. All right, so how are gardens funded? This is always the big question that everybody wants to know, because you can't build a garden without a little bit of money. And unfortunately, there is not necessarily a line item in the school budget dedicated to school gardens. So basically, what is typically happening is the teachers and staff interested in gardening at the school, they fundraise to pay for the garden installation and maintenance costs. And there's a number of small grants, so we'll give some examples of what those are in a minute. They can also fundraise for donations, and this is where parent associations or community associations can really come into play. Those partnerships can be key to helping to put together a small fundraising campaign to raise some money to pay for the garden. One really popular program is called the Green Healthy Smart Challenge program. This is a program that is run by the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, and it supports school gardens and greening related projects at city schools. So this is a funding program. They offer basically, I think it's about $1,000 to $1,500, depending on whether or not the school is a Maryland Green School or not, but they offer funding for projects. And many schools have gotten their garden projects funded initially through this program. And what makes school garden funding particularly complicated is that how the funds are obtained and the funding method really impacts the amount of red tape that school needs to go through in order to use those funds and access those funds. And there's different requirements for donations versus grants. And if you are ever working with teachers or school staff who are unsure how to approach this, the best advice is for that teacher or school staff to have a conversation with the principal, because the principal has a fair bit of autonomy over the budget of the school and would be able to provide some guidance there. We can go to the next slide. So possible sources of funding. This is just, we have a more extensive list on our school garden toolkit. But this is kind of an overview of some of the small grants or programs where schools have been very successful in getting funding. So for the first time ever, Friends of Great Kids Farm last year was actually able to offer some small garden funding. We hope to continue that in the future, but the Green Healthy Smart Challenge program, the Whole Kids Foundation, Chesapeake Bay Trust, the Maryland Agricultural Education Foundation, they all provide funding that schools have had some good luck with for school gardens. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And these are all live links, so we'll share the link to this presentation afterwards so you can all have these resources.
I did also share it in the chat. So if your chat's not open, but you want to follow along, you can go ahead and click on that. And Laura, do you think you're able to go through this part in just about 2 or 3 minutes?
Yep, sure.
Okay,
So
great.
just to overview the resources that we offer, one of the main ones is we offer this online school garden toolkit. The link is right there. It's an online website where we have compiled all sorts of links to lesson plans and funding sources and tips on designing a garden and things like that. We'll go to the next slide. We also offer one-on-one consulting. So each school has a farm to school liaison. That's basically Elle or myself, depending on where the school is situated. So I work with schools on the west or southwest part of the city. Elle works with schools on the east, northeast, southeast side of the city. But if you're not sure which category your school falls into, you can just email that farms@bcps email address, and we will all get that email. We'll go to the next slide. We also offer assistance with this approval process that I mentioned earlier. So the district does have what's called a facility enhancement application that's required for any permanent infrastructure at the school. That does include things like raised beds, murals, seating, often things that are included in garden projects. It is not required for container gardens or anything that's portable and movable, but the application is fairly straightforward. Elle and I can help schools fill it out. We can review it before they submit and basically provide them guidance in making sure that their application will be approved. We can go to the next slide. We also offer free material giveaways like seedlings and these activity kits that I mentioned earlier. We have lots of different kit types, but this is also a useful resource for teachers in generating enthusiasm about the garden. So if they're starting a garden project, they could use one of our kits to grow herbs on the windowsill or to start a vermicompost bin and generate a little bit of enthusiasm or interest around the project that way. We'll go to the next slide. And finally, another service that we offer is we offer professional development. This year, we have been able to offer a professional development session as an optional session in every one of the district's systemic professional development days. So that's been wonderful. And we'll also offer sessions to individual schools upon request. And our topics often include how to make school gardens sustainable and lasting, because as Elle will talk about, we have a big challenge with school gardens in that they are often started and then abandoned shortly thereafter for reasons we'll discuss. And then in April, our next PD session is actually going to be on some of the ins and outs of gardening itself. So we will go to the next slide. So finally, I also wanted to just touch upon support we do not provide, and there's always exceptions to this. There are no hard and fast rules, but in general, we are not doing the labor for installing or maintaining gardens. I wrote, unless you ask really, really nicely, because we have had schools ask really, really nicely, and I have definitely shown up to weed a school garden from time to time. And we generally cannot provide funding for every school garden. So as I mentioned, Friends of Great Kids Farm was able to provide some funding, but we could not come close to meeting the demand for funding that was out there. So, we can provide a lot of guidance and resources and information, but we can't do all the work and we can't raise all the money. And the other caveat to this is that we really believe philosophically that garden projects should be school-led. So we want the goals, the design, the motivation for the garden to come from staff and students at the school, and we can help facilitate that process. But what we don't want to do is kind of create a preset garden design template that we just plunk down at various schools. All right. So I think I'll turn things over to you, Elle, unless there's any questions on what we've just been discussing.
Questions, comments, concerns?
I just want to say I find this very informative. It's fascinating to see how you guys support so many schools. I didn't realize there are that many gardens out there. So this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why we say we can't go to every school garden and weed it for them, unfortunately. There are a lot of them out there.
All right, Laura, I'm going to remove your spotlight. adding myself in. This is also a great time. If you're not already, do a little get up and stretch in between our sessions here, because we're about to talk about some challenges. So let's bring it in. I'm trying to look at the two screens at once. Here we go. Challenges. Oh, wait, I wasn't supposed to do that. Go back, go back. Slideshow. Okay. I was supposed to let you answer the challenges. So a school reaches out to you, or maybe you reach out to the school. They want help with a school garden. Maybe they want to start a school garden. We're going to do a little brainstorming. Maybe you got a sneak peek. Maybe you're cheating and looking ahead on the slides. Like I said, you could. And please go ahead and just unmute if you're comfortable, or you can write in the chat. What do you imagine are challenges that school gardens have? Let's start with challenges for building and maintaining them. And after that, we'll go to challenges for people using the gardens.
I say a challenge for the building and the maintaining is the starting it is the timing everything.
Yeah. What could be another challenge?
Summer. Yeah. When schools are closed, or if you don't have a summer program at the school.
That is a big one. What else we got?
Well, one thing that is the maintaining, I think, is the hard part. If it starts getting overgrown with weeds, it discourages people. And the other thing is that there can be a certain amount of vandalism. There's a school, well, Arlington Elementary, and they have these beautiful big tubs with soil in them. And some of the neighbor kids thinks it's fun to run from tub to tub and leave their footprints in them.
Yeah, it's like a little parkour course for free in
Yeah,
the school
yeah,
garden. Yeah. Go ahead.
Critters.
Say that again.
Critters.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the regular challenges of all gardens.
So when I was helping at my daughter's school, it was always, turnover among teachers, because you would have a dedicated teacher, and then he or she would move on, and then the garden would fall apart. And also just like buy-in from the teachers. It requires a lot of work, and it's a lot to ask of teaching staff.
Thank you. So as you can see, many of the things you said are listed here, or they'll be listed on the next slide. Some of this we already addressed a little bit, but of course, the lack of funds can be one of the biggest pieces, including lack of funds to actually pay teachers for their time, where maybe some sports activities after schools, if a teacher coaches, that might be, they might get some sort of stipend and be paid for that, or if they tutor after school. But if they run the garden club after school, there might not be an opportunity for pay. There are some schools doing that, and when schools have the funds, we encourage them to, but it's not a given. In terms of using the gardens, we talked about summer, but there's also just that aspect of what do we do in the winter? Because we have this garden, but there's not much going on in it in the winter time as well. And just the main hurdle of staff who are excited about gardening, but intimidated by it, or just feel like they don't know what to do. And some people are like, jump in and just do it anyway, people, but not everyone is. So a school reaches out to you about a garden and you call Ghostbusters. Just kidding. Don't do that. Call us or email us. Laura left our main email in the chat earlier, on an earlier slide. You'll see our emails a lot through here. We want you to be in touch with us and use us as a #1 resource for supporting schools or helping you support a school. So when we're supporting a school, we always start with a site visit. That's going to help us address all these challenges that can come up and build them into the design and plan for the garden from the beginning. So a number one thing we do when we have a site visit is we look for the location. Sometimes even an old garden location was actually not a very wise location. Maybe it was very far from a water spigot or from sunlight. As was mentioned, vandalism issues, of course, come up, and there's ways to mitigate that somewhat, although not fully. It is just something that we continually deal with. How close are we to a doorway that students will exit to get out? If the pre-K teacher is the one who wants to use the garden, but they have to walk half a mile across the school and around the outside at a very large school that's pre-K to 8th grade to get to that garden, then by the time they walk out there, like their day is done. So that's something to keep in mind. We talked a little bit about summer, but summer access can also potentially be an issue. If the garden is in a gated area, do the teachers or community members who want to volunteer there have access to that gated area in the summer if the school is closed? So those kinds of things we think about. Managing a garden that is derelict and how do we bring it back to life can be a question. And on that site visit, we are also starting the conversation on what are the team roles for the adults who want to be on this team. They don't all have to do everything for the garden. We'll start to break down what those different roles are, as well as the student team roles. And we'll talk about funding and the facilities application. So we want to kind of hit all these things at once. And of course, if they have other questions or concerns, we'll bring that up right away in our site visit. Here's what we're not doing on our first site visit. We aren't getting excited about planting bananas or broccoli. I looked up bananas versus broccoli and hit image search and that came up. I thought it was fun. And of course, not everyone knows that you're not going to be very successful growing bananas here in all climates, but that kind of education of what we can grow and when we'll grow it, we'll get to in a further step, even though that can be the most exciting thing for people to talk about first. These are a list of 5 tips that we give for school gardens when people come to us. So I just threw that slide up here. It's a bit of a summary of a lot of what we have already talked about. And that can be, you know, if you come back to this slide and you're like, what do I need to remember to tell people? This kind of 5-tip pointer sheet can be your go-to. Why do we always start with who's on your team? Because it's the thing that people probably aren't doing without us asking them. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're thinking about the location, they're thinking about what they're going to plant. Maybe they're thinking of organizing the kids, but they aren't necessarily thinking of how they're organizing the adults, how they're preventing themselves from getting burnt out, and how they're planning for the longevity of the program if or when they leave the school in a year or 2. As we like to say, teamwork makes the dream work. So we're asking them if they've communicated with their administration, to what extent, how supportive is their administration? That might dictate to us how much funding and energy we put into that garden. Maybe we just do something really small because the administration isn't giving them much other support. And that's fine. We'd rather do something small and sustainable than dream big and have it fizzle out. And a few other tips that you can see on here that we always point out to people. Finally, as Laura said, we really just encourage people to know that taking their time is okay. For example, we had a school apply who has a derelict garden. It was the Walter P. Carter School for some of the funds that Friends of Great Kids Farm had granted. Actually, 2 different staff at that school applied. They hadn't spoken with each other about their application, or if they had spoken with administration, their administration didn't tell each other that each other was applying. So we got these 2 applications. We saw that they weren't quite ready in terms of teamwork to accept our funds for this year. And we also hadn't done a site visit to see that space. So I'm actually going out at the beginning of May to do a site visit. And then we're really looking at getting started with the school garden next year. And that's great.
Elle,
Yeah.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to chime in here that it actually
Yeah,
is
please.
fairly common that we will have a situation where we will have two separate staff reach out to us out of school looking for support with a garden. And they have just never talked to each other. Like they didn't know that there were two people at the school interested in starting a garden. So some of what we do is actually just connecting those dots and helping people make those connections. And it would not surprise me if as master gardeners, you have a similar experience where you might actually hear from multiple people at a school who both have the same interest and they just haven't connected within the school. So I think we often have this assumption that everybody's talking to each other at a given school, but that's not always the case.
Thanks for emphasizing that, Laura. So when we are doing the site visit, one of the most important things to look for first is where are those water spigots outside the building. The school is going to need water. Not everyone. Many people will come to you and say like, oh, I'd love to put in a rain barrel. And then we sort of have to explain that rain barrels have to be connected to downspouts. That's not really a viable option at any school that I know of, unless they have some sort of external shed or structure that they can add a gutter and a rain barrel to. And then in that case, it's usually not going to be enough water to feed their garden. So we want to find that spigot. We want to make sure it works, get them to find out from their administration who the facilities person is, who has the key to turn the spigot, and can they get permission to have it. That can just be an easy win. Or if the spigot's not working, that's one of the first things we want to find out, so we can work with the facilities team at Baltimore City Schools to get that spigot working again, because that is a facilities issue and facilities should be taking care of that and managing it, but they can't do it if they don't know about it. And it may take some time, so we want to hit that first thing. Of course, we want to look at the sun. That's obvious to all of us as master gardeners, but that's not always what the teacher at the school is thinking about, because they're thinking about maybe the nicest, flattest spot or the places closest to the door. And so we're balancing spigot, hose distance, having enough sun. And of course, in terms of the hose, we don't want any hamburglers stealing our hoses from us. So is there a doorway close enough nearby where we can store it? Do we need to buy a locking shed with a really sturdy lock to store that hose in it, so that every time you're taking it out to water every single day, maybe you don't have to bring that hose back out? Or maybe we're just recommending they buy a, why am I blanking? What are the like pop off hose ends called? So it's just
A quick connect.
Quick connect, thank you. So it's just easier to attach and unattach the hose, things like that. In terms of other challenges and how we address, our next thing is that getting permission and that application. So now you have the link here and a little bit of a description of what needs to be included on it more specifically. And we can really start helping the schools make their budget. I'm going to actually open this link so you can take a look. Laura, did you make this budget? Yeah. So this is a really, really nice beginner school budget.
Nice.
And you can see on here garden infrastructure and installation. So this is if a school just really didn't know where to start, this budget can be a great starting place. Of course, these numbers are as of whenever, Laura looked it up this winter. Oh, in 2021. So, prices change, but this gives you a really nice starting point for infrastructure and installation, garden tools, things that you need annually and things that you need periodically, and adding all of those up and considering them as they go along. When they get started, they might not need to think about what they need in a year, 2 years. That might be a little too much, but we as their consultants want to have that in mind. So this is here for you all. And finally, the fun part, which is actually consulting on plants. So actually, if you clicked on this calendar, you'd get to that DC School Garden vegetable planting calendar. Theirs is so nice that we didn't need to make one. And there are, of course, others that the University of Maryland Extension makes available. And we tend to use a combination of those to make recommendations for what to plant and when. And oops, did not mean to do that. Next slide. And we really want to focus in on what are we doing in the winter. Typically, we recommend for them to just get those beds covered in the winter so that if they have raised beds, they don't get filled with grass and weeds before they start planting in the spring, which is usually not until after spring break. So of course, this time of year right now, when we have all our grasses coming up and our purple dead nettle and all these other beautiful, wonderful native pollinator weeds that we just don't want in our garden beds, we keep those covered. And of course, for summer, we might be recommending, we all love cucumbers, kids love cucumbers, but maybe we don't plant cucumbers if you're not going to be here in July to harvest cucumbers, because that was a lot of work you put into it. You might not get watered enough, and then you won't even get to harvest what you planted.
That's interesting.
Are there any questions about, that kind of what we described in terms of how we're meeting those challenges before we turn to our more general, how can we support you and how can you support us discussion portion of the evening? All right, well, feel free to jump in with those questions. We wanted to give a few pointers on how you can actually support our work. Thank you, Laura, for adding that in the chat. For schools that don't have anyone maintaining the garden this summer, we also recommend they put it to bed in the summer and start with new plantings in the fall. Can you tell us what that means, Kathleen? This is the GIEI year of the sweet potato.
Grow It, Eat It is one of the Master Gardener departments, and every year they have a crop, and this year it's the sweet potato. And I often recommend it because it is wonderful. You can plant it in the spring and harvest in the fall, and it covers out the weeds. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. So what can we ask from you? First of all, if a school reaches out to you or you reach out to a school that's in your neighborhood, your community, please also reach out to us and just include us in that conversation. We may say, thank you, here's some resources, keep doing what you're doing, or we may feel the need to jump in. Either way, we're here to support you. So please, please, please reach out to us. In general, of course, schools are often looking for that general consulting work. That's work we can do, but if you can do it also, we would love to hand it off to you, because we're supporting all the schools in the district, and you just have your maybe one school that you're working with, and that's your role as a Master Gardener volunteer. So please take that off our hands, and you'll be able to be more hands-on with them, I'm sure, than we would. In terms of leading programs, that's something we'll talk about in a moment, but even just leading in an experienced garden club or a group of volunteers doing a garden setup day in their cleanup or planting effort, people are always just looking for not necessarily your hands planting, but your guidance and how to do it as they are doing it and showing them along. Finally, we get many offers from schools, or excuse me, we get many opportunities from schools who would like us to come to a STEAM night, to come to a Earth Day event or some other fair at their school. And we have a pretty much ready to go plant a seed kit that they can take home. Gets a little pot, they get the little seed, they plant in it. We have a plastic bag, we have the instructions that go home, we have little vegetable temporary tattoos they can put on. It's very cute. And we provide the soil, pot, seeds, all of that. We can't be at every event. We already work all day running trips. Sometimes we don't want to come and do an evening or weekend event. And if that's something you're interested in, first of all, please let me know. I coordinate volunteers on our end for those that reach out to us. And so I can say, hey, we have this, STEAM night coming up. For example, I can tell you right now, April 27th at a school from 5 to 7, if you're available, that we've committed to, but also sometimes we say no, but we could say yes if you're interested. And finally, schools might ask you, and you might not have all of those resources available, and you can just come to us and say, hey, school reached out to me for this particular event. Can we use your resources? And the answer is pretty much yes. So let us know about that. From there, I wanted to throw in that what else question of, can you think of anything else besides what's on this list of how you as Master Gardeners could support our work with Baltimore City Schools Gardens?
Well, I would just say, it's AJ, that just learning so much about how Great Kids Farms and your work, how you guys work together to support the schools. I have a much better understanding now of how much you do, what you're capable of doing, and the areas where we can better support you. And hearing that the STEAM night activities would be something that I think would be would work well with Master Gardeners and their schedules, because one of the issues I think some of us have are the work hours. And with the school events, they can't always come in during the workday to lend a hand to help. But as you said, those evening hours, we could pitch in, and certainly the weekend hours as well.
I also think those STEAM nights would do a very nice job of getting the word out within the school community about the potential for partnering with the Master Gardeners. I'm not sure that that's always well known.
Yeah. Beautiful,
Within
thank
the
you.
schools. I am a teacher in the schools, and I have just become a Master Gardener. And most people that I work with had no idea what I was doing when I was going through the process.
Yeah, and we're really happy if you come to any STEAM nights, whether you come with us or you go on your own. We're very happy for you to, I don't know if there's a Master Gardener t-shirt or bring a tablecloth, or just bring anything you would also like to bring to promote alongside our work. We're very happy for that. Our last question for you is, how can we support you? Is there anything else that you are looking for, whether it be a next training, whether it be individual support, or at this time, if you just have any other questions or comments for us? This is our open forum for the last 5 minutes of our training time together. So please pepper us with questions and ideas of what you'd like to see from us next.
Well, I think it's great that you've shared this information with us so that we know you are there as a resource. And I very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
I will just say another appreciation is that since not everyone is familiar with all the schools in Baltimore City, sometimes we get requests and we're not sure if it, or at least I wasn't sure if it is a Baltimore City school. And I will say you guys have been great about responding whether or not it falls into the charter school, or if it's a school within your district that you can support. And you've always been very helpful whenever I had questions about how we can support the school, regardless if it's a, if it's part of the Baltimore City Public School System. So that's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if it's not a Baltimore City school, you're welcome to use any of these resources as you'd like. And as Laura just put in the chat, any Baltimore City charter school is part of the Baltimore City Public School System. So whether they're a traditional public school, a charter school, a school for students with special needs, that is a Baltimore City public school for students with special needs, then those fall under our territory. Any other ways you all are thinking we can support you?
Well, one thing you were saying, you might like to do another talk with us, talking about tips of working with students. And that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, I'd love to actually run by this group and see what interest there is. What we were thinking in terms of next steps for some training and actually leading student groups and working with student groups was to do that as a more hands-on in-person training. I think it's pretty easy to look up pointers online of how to work with groups of kids, and it's much more effective for us to work together and practice. And we would first of all love to offer for anyone to shadow us when we are working in school gardens. I know that will conflict with work hours for many people, but in addition to the shadowing opportunities, we'd love to work with you all and set up a time when we could run a hands-on training if there's enough. And if we get even 3 or 4 people, I think, to me, I won't speak for Laura, but to me, that's enough interest to run a training.
Very cool.
Can master gardeners volunteer without registering with the city as a volunteer, with the city schools as a volunteer?
Great question. So there's no requirement that volunteers with any city school register through what's called the PI portal. I will make sure we add that as a resource link, because you can sign into the PI portal, and which stands for something engagement. I'm sorry, I forgot what it is. You can sign into the PI portal and put yourself as offering services as a master gardener to schools, and schools whose community school coordinators or their engagement. Thank you, Laura. I had it completely wrong. Partners in education. Each school has a person at that school who's in charge of managing that school's PI portal. And if they're active on it, they might see your listing and just actually reach out directly to you. But it's not required you be listed there. However, if you are working, and if you are working with students on a one-time basis, like you just do a drop-in and work with them that one time, you do not need to get fingerprinted and background checked, etc. The person who is managing you as a volunteer needs to put your license through the system that looks up the sex offender registry and make sure you're not barred on that list. And other than that, you can be there. If you work with a group weekly, at least 4 times or more, then you have to go get fingerprinted. And it's a very easy process. You just sign up for a time, you go to the central office, and whoever, again, is the volunteer coordinator at that school should give you that information. But also I manage all that information. So I will happily send all of that to anyone who needs it, and take that lift away from a busy school administrator or community school coordinator. That's a really good question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you, I'm sorry, did you say 4 times a month or 4 times a week?
Yeah, it's basically if within a school year, you're going to be technically within a month. It's basically if you're going to do a once a week thing, then you need to get fingerprinted. If not, you don't need that. That's if I was to summarize.
And does the school district, does it pay for the fingerprinting, or would we pay?
Yes, it is paid for by the Office of Family and Community Engagement.
Okay.
And we do it at our central office, so we do it in-house.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, I have one last question for everyone, which is just to follow up on that question of possibly doing an in-person training. And if you want to come off mute or just write in the chat, give us a thumbs up just to show interest. And that way myself and Laura and AJ can follow up with anyone who would be interested in that in-person training. It would be skills, tips, and tricks for working with students of various ages in outdoor spaces. How do we do outdoor classroom management? How do we help them be curious about dirt and bugs instead of scared of it? How do we give everybody roles and jobs to do in the garden? How do we help teachers learn those skills alongside us, etc.? So if that's something you're interested in, please go ahead and throw your name in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Renee and Kathleen.
With that, I am going to stop our recording. And to anybody watching online in the future, thanks for joining us.